Hello everyone, Tyler King here with a new episode of NuReview. This is the one that you guys have all been waiting for. This is finally going to be my review of Peter Murphy's 7th studio album, Unshattered. Now, before I begin the review, I want to say two things. The first thing being that if you haven't seen my latest video on fans versus fanatics, I would recommend that you watch that before watching this video, and when I get into the review, hopefully you'll see why. So if you haven't watched that video yet, watch that first, and then come back to this one. The second thing that I want to say is that in the past, with my reviews that I was putting up 2, 3, 4 years ago, however long ago, usually I would open up the review with information on the album, such as release date, people who played on it, things like that. And then I would essentially do a song-by-song breakdown of the entire album, followed by an off-the-cuff, usually single take, overall opinion of the album, and then give a numerical review, so on and so forth. So I wanted to do a different format for my videos going forward, which would essentially be to not give as intense of a overview of the information on the album. And then also I ended up thinking about it, and I don't think from this point going onward I'm going to be doing the song-by-song breakdown. For a couple of reasons. The first reason being is that it made it take longer for videos to get out. And the second being is that I feel like if you're watching my reviews, you've already heard the album or songs in question. So therefore, I just felt like it was redundant to go over every single individual song. So essentially what that means is that from here going forward, unless I hear otherwise, my reviews are just going to be a long, usually single take off the top of my head feeling about the album. If you do want me to go back to the old format of doing a song-by-song breakdown, let me know. It isn't that I don't enjoy doing that. I do, but I feel like it takes up more time in the video. And again, I feel like most people watching my reviews have already heard it. So it doesn't make sense for me to say like, oh, there's a drum intro, if obviously you've listened to the song, you know that there's a drum intro. With all of that out of the way, here's the video review I've been putting off now for about 2.5 years. This is Unshattered by Peter Murphy. This is his 7th studio album, released October 19th, 2004, about, I think, 2 years after his previous album, Dust. Now, I forget if I mentioned it in my review of Cascade or my review of Dust, but I feel like Peter Murphy's career can be summed up in two eras: pre-Cascade and post-Cascade. And what I mean when I say that is if you listen to all of his albums going up to and including Cascade, you hear an evolution of Peter and eventually the 100 Men. You have Should the World Fail to Fall Apart, which is mostly a studio album. What I mean when I say that is essentially all of the percussion is programmed either on a computer or a drum machine. There's a lot of synth bass and just generally synthesizers going around in that album. Then on Love Hysteria, you finally have live drums, a live band. On Deep, you hear the band developing even further, and so on and so forth until you get to Cascade, which I think was not necessarily the pinnacle, but I think the natural evolution of where that style that Peter Murphy had been doing for so long was going. And then you have everything post-Cascade, which I think apart from Ninth and Lion, you can't necessarily hear a progression in the sense that Dust is this very ethereal, somber, moody piece where the songs are very long. There's a lot of focus on the Middle Eastern instrumentation. It's very lush and open. And then you have something like Unshattered, which, this is what you came for. Here's my opinion of Unshattered. And then you have Unshattered, which I think isn't necessarily the antithesis of what Dust is, but it's so overproduced, I think, to the point of a lot of the instrumentation being stagnant, and there not being much of an edge to this album. I was talking to one of my friends on the phone earlier today, and they're also a big Bauhaus slash Peter Murphy fan, but I want to say this is the one Peter Murphy album they've never listened to, and they asked me to describe it. And I said, well, you know the album Hours by David Bowie? They said yes. I said, it's essentially Hours by David Bowie. What I mean when I say that is Hours is a very glossy, shiny, overproduced album for the most part. And I think the same can be said for Unshattered. It's also similar to Hours in the sense that, for me, Hours feels like two albums put together. You have the first, I think, 3 or 4 songs, which are very almost like TLC sounding in nature, and then you have the last 5 or 6, which are a little bit harder cutting, not to the extent that something like Outside or Earthling is, but you can hear still some of that sensibility in the music. Unshattered is very similar, but backwards in the sense that it's the first 6 or 7 songs that I don't necessarily care for, but the last 3 or 4 aren't great except for one, which I'll get to, but they're definitely better than everything that came before. Now, what I mean when I say that this album feels overproduced, let me try to break that down if you're not familiar with that phrase or the idea of overproduction. Basically what I mean when I say something is overproduced means that there's no grit to it. It's very sanitized in the studio. So take for instance something like In the Flat Field by Bauhaus, which is not an overproduced album. It still has a lot of edge, it still has a lot of grittiness to it. There's some not very noticeable, but there are some mistakes here or there. And not everything is like perfected. Not everything has this perfect feel to it. Most of Unshattered, I think, is the opposite of that, especially a song like Kiss Myself or Piece of You. The other thing about this album that I think holds it back is the lyrics. There aren't that very many songs on here where I can point out the lyrics and say, wow, that's great. Like, for instance, Kiss Myself opens with some of my least favorite lyrics Peter Murphy has ever written, which is, and this is not verbatim, so forgive me if I'm wrong, all of you, bigger Peter Murphy fans out there, but I believe the lyric goes, open my eyes, but they're not mine, I'm looking through you. Which just seems very awkward of a lyric. I don't think it's great. I also don't like the line in Piece of You where he says, I'm a Formula One star. I'm the wheels and the car. It kind of reminds me a little bit of some of the more recent lyrics that Nick Cave is writing, and if you're a friend of mine, you know that I'm not very big on the more recent Nick Cave material. That's a video for a whole other day. I feel like it's a good thing that Bauhaus ended up reuniting again very shortly after this album, because I think that that reunion infused a sense of the Bauhaus sensibility back into his music. And you're going to hear a lot of that when you get to his next album, Ninth. Again, that will be another video. And it's a shame, because you have some pretty good talent on this album. You have Eric Avery from Jane's Addiction. You have Stephen Perkins from Jane's Addiction and Porno for Pyros. You have Paul DiStefano, I might be mispronouncing that name, also from Porno for Pyros. You have Kevin Haskins from Bauhaus playing drums on 1 or 2 songs on here. Again, I'm not looking at the track listing in front of me. I don't have notes like I used to have. All of this, I just hope I'm remembering it correctly from memory. If I make mistakes about any of this, let me know. That's why also I'm trying to give myself a little bit of wiggle room in case I do say something that's not true. I can back out of it. I got myself covered. Now, the pros on this album, I will say, are, I think, the last four songs, which, if I remember in the correct order, are Give What He's Got, Blinded Like Saul, The First Stone, and Breaking No One's Heaven. I feel like from that point on, from Give What He's Got on, it feels like a very different album. It feels like you're getting a little bit more of that grit, a little bit more of that edginess to his music that used to be there. I also remember on some of my review videos that I would say that usually on a Peter Murphy solo album, up through and including Cascade, there would be at least one song that felt like it could have been a Bauhaus song. Unshattered picks up that trend. Nothing was like that on Dust. But Unshattered picks up that trend with Blinded Like Saul, which, besides one kind of awkward lyric about dolphins, which will come up again later on another song, um, besides that awkward lyric, it is a very hard rocking song. It's a very edgy song, and I think that knowing that that's the song that Kevin Haskins plays drum on that one, Eric Avery plays bass on that one. It's very indicative of those particular players that that would be essentially the hardest song on this album. Now, when I mentioned earlier that there was one song on here that I thought was really like the great song on here, that is The First Stone. I think that The First Stone from front to back is absolutely phenomenal and is absolutely the best song on the album. And the great thing about it is that unlike a lot of material that came before on this album, it's not forgettable. It has a really nice melody. It has kind of a groove to it. The instrumentation is very clear. It doesn't feel overproduced, and I could say that for pretty much all of the last four songs on this album. Um, there are some songs on here that I know I haven't mentioned before, like Thelma Sings to Little Nell, or Emergency Unit, or even the opener song, Idle Flow. And the reason for that is that, for me, they're not particularly memorable songs. And I even listened to this album again yesterday in preparation of doing this review video today. And besides bits and pieces, most of this album to me is just completely unmemorable, completely unremarkable, which again is a shame because of the talent involved here. Now, I don't like making videos where I just take a crap on a piece of work by a musician who I would ordinarily enjoy. Like, look at my Gary Newman review videos of his late 80s output, Strange Charm, Outland, that stuff. Um, Look at my review of the most recent, well, not the most recent, now, of the Look at the Moon live album by David Bowie. It doesn't make me happy to make these videos, and I think that that's one of the reasons why I waited so long to make this video, because at the end of the day, I really don't care for this album, and I'm eventually going to make a Peter Murphy album ranking video once I'm done with all of his solo albums, and you can bet this is going to be the one at the very bottom. And I think that besides this album, he's a musician who otherwise consistently puts out solid work after solid work. Bauhaus, his solo album, Dolly's Car with Met Karn. I just think that as an artist and a creator, generally, he does a pretty damn good job. But he really, really missed the target with this one. And I think that if it weren't for the last four songs, I would completely forget that this album exists. Now, I know also earlier I mentioned the theme about dolphins, and yes, he does mention the dolphins again in the last song, Breaking No One's Heaven, where he sings, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, The dolphin keeper lets us sail through all our love's prodigious veil, I think is the actual word for it. And, you know, Peter Murphy's always been kind of a nautically inclined lyricist. Gliding Like the Whale, Mercy Rain. I mean, that's just Cascade. Also Sails Wave Goodbye. But anyways, and it seems here, I don't know, maybe him and his wife went and swam with some dolphins and it inspired some lyrics for this album. I don't know. That's what I get from listening to some of these songs. Which is cool, I guess. Dolphins are cool. Um, but kind of a weird lyrical motif you got going on through these songs, Peter. Oh well. Now, another thing that I would do in my old review videos is I would rate, not rate, I would give my 3 favorite songs and my 3 least favorite songs, which, trust me, there are some least favorite songs on this album. Um, I'm just trying to rack my brain if I have anything else to say about this particular album. I just think that at the end of the day, unless you're a hardcore Peter Murphy fan, which I consider myself to be, I mean, I've got the tattoo of him on my arm and everything. Obviously, I like the guy. But, you know what? Even if you are a hardcore fan, I can't think of much on here that would make you want to come back to it. And if you do like this album, that's perfectly fine. Again, like I've said in my previous fan versus fanatic video, all of this stuff is just my personal opinion on things. I just don't really like this album, and like I have already said, I tend to forget it exists half the time. I just think, wow, cool, Dust came out in 2002, and then a few years later was the Bauhaus reunion, and then Ninth. Unshattered very rarely springs to my mind as something that I want to listen to, and I think that if it weren't for making this video, I would not have listened to it again. And I think that besides maybe in preparation for the video I make where I end up ranking all of his albums, I can't see myself listening to this album from front to back for quite some time. I think that it definitely could have been better, and I think that it's telling that Peter Murphy hasn't really played any of the songs from this album since the initial tour for it. I think also, it's telling that between the San Francisco and New York residency shows he did in 2019, this was the only album of his that was not originally scheduled to have its own dedicated evening of him playing it from front to back. I know that there was an evening that was supposed to be dedicated to Lion, and then Peter Murphy ended up suffering his heart attack, so that got rescheduled and changed into a different thing. But at least there was an attempt there to perform the songs from Lion, and he played songs from that album even into his acoustic tour that he did in, I think, 2014, 2015. Again, might be wrong about the years. But yeah, I just think it's very telling when an artist doesn't focus on material from a specific album, even close to when it came out. I've been seeing Peter Murphy live since I think 2010 or 2011. This is the only album of his where I've never seen a single song played from it. And yeah, I think that that is telling of his own personal opinion of this work. I think that maybe some of these songs could have worked better, possibly under a different producer, but it doesn't work in the version that we got for me, for the most part. So, I'm going to do my 3 least favorite songs first, and then my 3 favorite songs. So, 3 least favorite songs would be Kiss Myself, probably Pieces of You, or Piece of You, I'm sorry, And then honestly, you'd have to twist my arm because then it's either going to be Thelma Sings to Little Nell or The Weight of Love. Both of those songs, pretty dicey for me. And then my three favorite songs, which in no particular order, are the three last songs on the album, which are Blinded Like Saul, The First Stone, and Breaking No One's Heaven. I think all three of those are solid. If I could include a fourth one, it would be Give What He Got. I know I didn't talk about that one very much. It's a nice mid-tempo, not quite ballad song. It's good. It reminds me a little bit of some of the stuff off of Deep, like Crystal Wrists or Seven Veils. It doesn't have as lush of production, but it's that same kind of general feeling for me with that particular song. And now comes the moment you've all been waiting for. What is my numerical score for Unshattered by Peter Murphy? Now, if every song were like the first 7, it would probably be something like a 2 out of 10, which would just mean the entire thing is unremarkable, unmemorable, and I don't intend to listen to it again. However, the last 4, despite really only one of them, I think, being a perfect or near perfect piece of music, does help to elevate the rating. Unfortunately, though, not enough where I could give it something like a 6 or even a 5. Overall, I would give this album a 4 out of 10. Like I said, there's not a lot here that moves me and inspires me and really makes me feel anything, but the last bit of the album does pick back up and does help to lessen the blow that all the other songs on this album deal to me. Now, again, this is just my opinion. I don't even know why I have to say that, but some people don't want to remember that when they're writing comments. But yeah, this is just my opinion. I and again, like I said, if this is your favorite Peter Murphy album or one that you hold in high regard, that's perfectly fine. No points against you. Just for me, it doesn't particularly do very much. I also have gotten comments in the past saying that I talk a little bit quickly. I apologize for that. That's not something that I'm necessarily aware of as I talk. Generally, especially in these one take sort of things, I'll remember something as I'm in the middle of talking about something else, which is why sometimes I will just immediately jump into the next thought without slowing myself down. I apologize for that if that is something that I did a lot in this video. I probably did. I apologize. I'm sorry. But I have been waiting a long time to put this video up because, I don't like crapping on musicians that I otherwise like I've said. And I also don't like having, not necessarily extreme, but, opinions that other people might not necessarily agree with. But, you know, I hope that this is able to create some sort of, discourse, conversation, what have you, in the Peter Murphy community. Um, I just, just again, and I know I keep saying it, I want to like this album, I just don't. So that is Unshattered by Peter Murphy. 4 out of 10. Not his best. I'm sorry. Next week or the week after that, depending on certain things happening in my life, I will get up the video for 9th. Do not worry. That will be coming much sooner than this one did. So until next time, I'm Tyler King with NuReview. Keep listening to great music, and I will see you next time.